So I do want to take the time to welcome and introduce a very esteemed leader in our province. Sophie Pierre obviously is no stranger to any of us or to the Treaty Commission as the former Chief Commissioner extended numerous times. She has told me she's retired. We're trying to figure out really what that means because she was on the road yesterday when I was trying to text her. As I said, Sophie isn't a stranger to any of us. Her career with her people, with our people, extends back many, many years. Sophie has been one of my mentors throughout my lifetime and also to many other people that are in this room, I'm sure, and many communities across this province and indeed across the country. Sophie has been involved from early days of fighting for our rights, of having Section 35 into the Constitution. She was involved in that process. She's been involved extensively in her own community as chief. I can't tell you for how many years, but I always tell her that I've always known her as Chief Sophie Pierre, and I think she always will be Chief Sophie Pierre to me. She has worked on economic development initiatives in her own community, most notably St. Eugene Mission, where a residential school was turned into something that is economically prosperous for their community and a place where they can rebuild the pride of the Danakha Nation. Sophie represents British Columbia, our people, her community internationally. I know that she works with the Native Nations Institute, and I'm sure many other things that I'm not aware of as well. She has worked most recently, she worked as the Chief Commissioner for the BC Treaty Commission, as I'd said before. I just can't say enough about Sophie and what she has done for our people and for me personally over the years, and I am absolutely thrilled and honored to be able to welcome Sophie Pierre to make a presentation to us.
Kisukyuki Kapiniskir. Haha, Wilkanikus Sukil Okus Lawam, Naklitki, Skuslopniskir. And now, if my trusty little iPad will work, oh dear. Wouldn't that be something? Yeah, I tried not to, for many years, tried to avoid this, but just some things are inevitable, aren't they? This is actually just came into my mind, and sometimes I just say what comes into my mind. Reminded me the first time that I ever used my iPad, like in public and in one of our functions, and it was a sad occasion. It was one of my closest relatives had passed away, and they'd asked me to do her eulogy, and I did it on iPad, and it was, I think that what I said about my relative the fact that I was using an iPad had as much impact about what I said about my relative. So I've tried to use it more often so that it doesn't seem so strange to be using it. Anyway, Angela, thank you very much for that introduction. That was very kind. And I want to wish all of you a good afternoon, and that's what I said in Ktunaxa earlier, that I'm very happy to be here in Coast Salish territory, to be here among you, many of you friends and acquaintances and colleagues that I've worked with over the years. It's good to be in this retirement phase of my life and to be at home, but then it's also good to be able to do something like this occasionally because, you know, I really do miss all of you folks. And I miss the work that we're all very much involved in and the work that you continue to do, and that I will always be there in some way, being able to support what you do. That is my wish. I want to thank the Treaty Commission for inviting me to join in the discussions that you're having this week, these next 2.5 days, around the whole concept of the multi-communities working together in one governing structure. This issue of working together in one governing structure is a very recent issue. You know, it's something that was just created not very long ago by the Canadian government as they were enacting their laws around Indian Act and lands reserved for Indians, creating our Indian Reserve lands. Up until then, good governance within our nations and amongst our nations, amongst our neighboring nations, it was a given. Because if there wasn't good governance, if things weren't looked after in the proper way, it usually meant war. And war is never good. In a weak moment, a few weeks ago, I agreed that my portion of this forum would be to talk about constitutions. And you can thank Mark Smith for that. To talk about constitution building around the whole issue of multi-community nations, which really in my mind means rebuilding our nations, recognizing that the creation of our Indian bands and our separate reserve lands was simply a means to destroy that nation, that nationhood, that power that comes from our nations and from our nationhood, and that we need to take this back, that what we need is, in fact, nation rebuilding. It's an exciting step, and I know it's one that you're all engaged in. Now, the usual end goal of working on a constitution is creating a document, and its first purpose is internally, to determine how you're going to work internally. And then it also talks about, usually, how you're going to interact with the Canadian governments, federal and provincial, and other legal entities. What we don't see as often is that, and we do need to be more diligent in this, is that it should also, first of all, recognize and determine how one nation, your nation, is going to be recognizing and working with the adjoining nations, your neighboring nations. We spend a lot of time, a lot of resources in going after recognition from the Canadian government. What we don't do is spend that time respecting and recognizing each other as nations. So it's my view that as we build these constitutions, that has to be a very important part. If we do that, if we recognize each other's nationhood, we respect each other's traditional title lands, then it's going to be a heck of a lot more difficult for the settler governments to dismiss us as a whole. Now, the Constitution document itself, it's pretty straightforward. It has all its various chapters and parts to it. And it's really not of much interest to the average citizen. It's really kind of boring, right? But it's the mechanics of creating that Constitution that grabs the interest and the imagination. When a citizen, when one of your citizens can see themselves, can see their family, can see their culture and values reflected in the nation's constitution, well, then you know you've been successful. While each nation will accomplish this in their own way, there are some common themes, some common recipes, if you will, that are helpful. Building competency and capacity, plus ensuring access to proper tools and instruments, it's vital, it's imperative. There's nothing worse than sending out someone who's got limited knowledge and the wrong tools into a community meeting, looking for your community's support. So very important to start from that premise that you've got to be prepared, that we all need to be building that competency, but as well at the same time ensuring that we have the proper tools and resources. And this probably will require a new approach to the nation's investment in capacity building for self-government and in the way that we measure the outcomes of those investments, measure them with locally defined terms. Citizens must be engaged early, and they must be engaged often. Kind of reminds me of, who was it, Yogi Berra or somebody that always said, vote early and vote often? No. But you need to engage the citizens all the time. And they must get regular and meaningful feedback from the team that's interpreting what it is that the citizens are giving, their input. Their input comes from their heart. And so they need to have that feedback. While I was Chief Commissioner, I was saddened to see that we still had instances where legal counsel created constitutions with little or no input from the very citizens who were then required to declare that this is how they are going to govern themselves going into the future. We can't have that anymore. I don't know that it happens very much anymore. The constitutions we are talking about, they're not for meeting, just meeting legal requirements of other governments, but for the nation's future. To once again govern ourselves based on who we are, what we believe in, and how we will continue to protect our lands for all future generations. Effective citizen participation will also make it a lot easier to follow what I like to call the guiding principles from the Harvard study. And we're very fortunate to have Stephen Cornell here with us. Many of us have worked these past years with Stephen and with the NNI and are familiar with the Harvard study and those guiding principles. But it's like anything else that's a real truth. When something is true, then it always rings true whatever situation you put it in. And so when you're talking about nation rebuilding, or you're talking about developing the Constitution for your nation, there are some things that are just always have to be there. First and foremost is stability. That is something I know that, again, kind of like what I said a little while ago about who builds the Constitution, stability of right from the community level, from leaders at the community level, stability through the nation. People need to know what to expect. You know, when Angela said we're going to break for lunch, everybody expected that there was going to be lunch out there. It gave us some stability. But we're talking, of course, about something a little bit more important than in the type of stability at the nation level. Rules don't automatically change when new leaders step in, because if they do, then it creates you lose that stability. So a nation's constitution provides stability because it's not easy to change your constitution. It's not at anyone's whim that it can be changed. Second principle is fairness, so that people can depend on the stability that they're going to depend on, rather, is one that is going to be fair to all citizens, that it doesn't matter whose family the chief comes from, and it doesn't matter who's in your nation government. It doesn't matter who's sitting at the tables talking to the other governments, that you know that there's fairness. The third principle is having effective governments, something that the people can depend on, that you're going to get the job done, and ensuring that you have those tools that I was talking about earlier, those tools and instruments, so that you can be effective. And lastly, and always most importantly, is that it reflects who you are. The Constitution of the Ktunaxa people is going to talk about Ktunaxa Amak is, Ktunaxa Tlukaqwum, Ktunaxa Smaknik. Your Constitution is going to talk about your nation in the same way. From my own Ktunaxa experience, the development of our Constitution has been a very vital part of the ongoing The ongoing work, the ongoing exercise of rebuilding our governance through the treaty process. It's like Catherine was saying this morning, that whether or not we have a treaty, we know that we're not only have we reestablished ourselves as the Ktunaxa nation in Ktunaxa Mak'is, but the governing structure that we have is no longer going to reflect what we've always had in my lifetime and for the last 150 years under the Indian Act. It's not going to be like that anymore. The involvement of our citizens is written in the words of the Constitution, which start with, it's almost like the American Constitution, we the people. We start out with, therefore we, the Ktunaxa nation, in order to establish effective, responsible institutions, promote our citizens' well-being, sustain a thriving economy, and on and on and on and on, blah, blah, blah. But all those good things that we want for our people, that's how we start. And then we make assertions. We affirm our responsibility to self, to family, to community, to the nation, and on and on and on. We affirm our inalienable, inherent right to govern ourselves. We acknowledge the importance of our collective Ktunaxa nation vision and identity. We acknowledge and affirm our intent to maintain a stewardship role over Ktunaxa Mak'is. We assert all Ktunaxa Mak'is shall remain under Ktunaxa title for all time. We acknowledge and affirm our responsibility to the Ktunaxa nation as a whole to enact and enforce laws that are within the spirit and intent of this Constitution and are respectful of Kitnumutstitlil, which is the natural law. We also need, as we carry on, as we go further in our Constitution, we need that affirmation of recognizing, as we have always done as a nation, we've always said that we recognize that we have other nations that live within the borders of our territory, that we in fact have lands that we've shared with them since time immemorial. And so we need that actual affirmation. I just think that's so important because we've got nations that are fighting each other, and it's really hurtful. They spend more energy fighting their own rather than saving that energy to provide for a good future for our children as nations working together. So I gave you some of the sort of the body, if you will, of what's in the Constitution. And there's things that are going to be similar, and there are things that are going to be different. And it's really just what is it that you need in order to accomplish what your dreams and what your nation's dreams and intentions are. So from the Constitution, we understand that there are what could be called divisions of power. There are some things that will always be governed at the nation level. Ktunaxa Mak'is, for example, will be governed from the nation level. And then there are other things that will be governed at the community level. There will always be community responsibilities. There are family responsibilities, there are individual responsibilities. And so again, the Constitution goes into the division of those powers, what is protected as a whole people, belongs to everybody, and is always there for everybody into the future. As Catherine described this morning, every step that our nation has taken has been with the full participation of our citizens. Now, it's meant a much longer process, possibly, than may have been necessary, if we simply wanted a treaty between our Indian bands and the Government of Canada, I'm sure they would have been quite happy with that. But our primary intent, and I believe the intent of every one of you sitting in this room, our intent has always been to rebuild our nation, to reestablish, reinforce our culture and values, which have always been there, but they're tattered. We've had so much of the other governments that have kicked them around for so long. Our natural laws within our Ktunaxa. As we continue to finalize the negotiations, our Constitution reflects clearly our intent. That's what an effective Constitution must do. Thank you very much.